Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're so happy to see you all. We're going to get started in just about 1 minute, but in the meantime, we have a chat box question, and I think you all will really love it. It is going to be, what organization are you with, and what is your favorite thing about spring? So I don't know where you all are located, but I'm in Charleston right now, and the sun has just peeped out a little bit. So it gives me so much optimism and energy. So go ahead, take a second to introduce yourself and share what you love about spring, and then we'll get started in just a moment. All right, so if you just joined us, we are sharing what we love about spring in the chat box. A whole bunch of good answers just came in. Let's see, I'll do a few shout outs. Sally from Preserve West Virginia AmeriCorps. Hey, Sally, she is excited to get started gardening. I feel the same way. I'm already thinking about what I want to plant this year. And then we have Kendra McQueen from LifeBridge. She's excited to see the flowers bloom and lots of flowers blooming. Riley from Preserve West Virginia said the same thing. And let's do one more shout out to see what else we love about spring. Lots of common threads. I think we're excited to see the plants bloom and the weather to change a little bit. See if there's someone that said something really unusual on here. Oh, we'll end on this. So Vanessa said she's excited for it to no longer get dark at 5 p.m. Amen. I agree. And let's start on that. So if you haven't shared your answer, go ahead and put it in the chat box. We're just having fun. But if you haven't met us before, my name's Dana. I'm with Volunteer West Virginia, and I'm going to be helping with today's webinar. I've been here for almost 10 years. I love my job here, and I'm an AmeriCorps alum. And I wanted to showcase one of my pictures. So here I am on the right-hand corner, rebuilding a house for Habitat for Humanity in Iowa. So I love AmeriCorps. I did 3 years of service. I'm an AmeriCorps NCCC alum. I was based out of Iowa, and that's where I had this picture taken. And I'm also a Vista alum. And I moved to West Virginia to be a Vista member with the Children's Home Society. And I've been here ever since. So I really owe my whole career to AmeriCorps. That's why I put the Made in AmeriCorps sticker on my slide. And I'm just very grateful for my service. So I wanted to introduce myself and wish you all a happy early AmeriCorps week. That's next week. So we're getting started early with a special webinar. This webinar is part of our Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday series. If you haven't attended one, it's our free webinar series that we provide here where we explain our programs at Volunteer West Virginia. You're an AmeriCorps member, and that's one of our programs here. We help to oversee the AmeriCorps state programs, and we also promote volunteerism. And then at this webinar series, we network, we provide trainings, and we have fun. So today's going to be really informal and laid back. So just sit back and relax. We're going to be together for 2 hours. So we're going to have a good time. We have some really great topics coming up. Next week, we're doing our All About AmeriCorps webinar. So I know all of you are AmeriCorps members and alum, but if you're curious to learn more about AmeriCorps seniors or AmeriCorps NCCC, we'll be talking about those programs next week. So you won't want to miss it. It's going to be at 1 o'clock. And then in April for National Volunteer Month, we're going to talk about volunteer recognition tips and tricks. So if you have volunteers at your site, this would be a really good webinar. We're going to talk about different ways to recognize your volunteers on a low budget to a high budget. And then in May, this is one of our most popular trainings we do. It's grant writing nuts and bolts, and that'll be with Nikki from the Grant Advantage, and she's going to be teaching us how to write a grant. So if you've never written a grant before, if you're curious to learn more about grant writing, this is going to be a great opportunity. It's a free training for you all. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about the top 8 mistakes made after winning the grant. So after you receive your grant, what are some of the things you don't want to do? So that's going to be in June. And then the rest of the year is outlined on our website. So go ahead and sign up for those webinars so they're on your calendar. And today's webinar, we're going to be talking about Life After AmeriCorps, and we're going to be discussing career pathing for AmeriCorps members and alumni. And we're really lucky to have Shannon Stober with us here today. She's an AmeriCorps alum as well. She's going to share her story with us in just a moment, but she has her own business now. It is called Jumpstart Training and Development. So she's going to be leading today's training, and I think you're going to love her infectious attitude and happy energy. So Shannon, welcome.
Dana, good afternoon, West Virginia, and I think maybe Virginia as well. I'm so excited to be here. So, as Dana said, my name is Shannon Stober. Most folks just call me Stober. So, if you ever need to get my attention or we run into each other in person, feel free to use the informal. I appreciate it. And I want to take a couple of minutes to tell you a bit about who I am and how I have arrived in this space, and then we'll hop into today's topic of career pathing. So I am actually based in southwestern Montana. For folks who are familiar, I live in between Bozeman and Livingston, so just north of Yellowstone National Park. And I'm laughing because you're all talking about enjoying spring. And as I was telling Dana when we started today, we're still a good 3 months out from real spring. We have what we call first fall spring happening right now, so it's a little nice and warm. But we got several more months of winter before we start seeing things like plants. So enjoy that for me. So I'm based in Montana, and I've been here for about 23 years, but I'm originally from Colorado, born and raised. And so talk a little bit about how I arrived here, right? So it was about 23 years ago, and I was getting ready to graduate from a small school in Durango, Colorado called Fort Lewis College. With my degree in sociology and my minor in gender studies. And it dawned on me that the career pathways attached to that degree were less than obvious. So I was having a conversation with a friend one day, and she asked me, "Hey, have you ever heard of AmeriCorps?" At that point, I had not. Went home that evening, had a couple beers, watched the Cuba Gooding Jr. Classic Snow Dogs, and decided to see what this AmeriCorps thing was all about. And what I discovered is that not only could I leverage that program to begin putting some traction to the degree that I had just earned, but I could also use it to punch my ticket to Montana, which was a place that we had visited frequently growing up, have some family in the area, and had always had a little bit of an attraction to. So I applied for a Vista position in Bozeman, working at a teen center, and I was accepted, right? So a couple months later, I had the truck pointed north. I had my 120-pound dog, and I had a desk. To this day, I don't know why my 22-year-old brain was like, for sure, bring a desk with you. I think I was forecasting my administrative future, but I brought a desk. So I went on to do my first term, again, working at a teen center. I always laugh and say that when I signed up to serve America, I did not know that was going to include bouncing punk concerts and pulling booze off kids. That was, in fact, part of what I did. But I also learned a whole lot about civic engagement, capacity building, youth development, and just really fell in love with the work. So I signed up for a second term of service, moved to Helena, Montana, where I was in the role of Vista leader doing statewide positive youth development work. Following my 2 terms, I got hired at Serve Montana, which is our governor's office of community service, just like Volunteer West Virginia. And my title there was training officer. And that's where I had the opportunity to work with folks all around the country, thinking really critically about how we create meaningful spaces for folks like you, right? People who are inherently purposeful and values driven and are interested in really looking at the intersection of, what we're doing day to day and who we are as humans. Fell in love with the work, did not fall in love with the big P politics of it. So I was there for a few years, bounced over to Missoula, Montana afterwards to run an AmeriCorps program for college students. Wonderful program, but my particular role was a little too bureaucratic for me. So I went back to Bozeman, Montana, where I joined the staff of the Montana Conservation Corps, where I worked for 8 years as their director of programs. For folks who aren't familiar with Conservation Corps models, they're kind of fun. So this is where we gather up young people from all around the country, put them into crews, drop them into the backcountry with chainsaws and grizzly bears in the name of emotional intelligence and civic engagement. Loved every minute of it, loved working with those young people. I always say they taught me everything I know. That whole time I was there, though, I was side hustling as a trainer and a facilitator. And 10 years ago, I recognized that I needed to make a decision about what direction I wanted to go. So I started my own company, Jumpstart Training and Development. I have the privilege now of doing this work full time. I work with people all around the country, still very closely connected with the national service community, conservation community, have been working with regenerative agriculture a lot recently, dabble around with women's leadership quite a bit. And then when I'm working more locally, do a lot with small businesses, a couple dude ranches, a couple veterinarians. It's all over the place. So I always like to say I determine who I work with based on values and vibes. So that's a bit about me, just to give you a sense of how I've arrived here. And I'm really excited to talk to you more today about career pathing. So here's what this is going to look like in a moment. I'm going to pull us over to the shared screen, and we're going to guide our discussion today using a slide format, right? We'll have periods of me sharing information with you, followed by periods of invitation for you to actually spend some time reflecting and writing notes about what we're covering. About halfway through, we'll do some small group work for you to share out what's coming up, what you're reflecting on, and then we'll wrap up with another breakout group for an opportunity for you to sort of speak towards what you've learned today and how you move it forward. Just a side note, I do talk this fast the whole time. It's just how the good Lord made me. So we do have this recorded for you if you need it. You've got your handouts. As we're moving through, if you have questions, curiosities, or challenges for what I'm presenting, feel free to drop that in the chat. And when we're pausing for reflection and breakouts, I'll check that to see what might be coming up and what questions I can answer. If there's a problem with delivery, feel free to unmute and be like, Stober, we can't hear you or we can't see your slide. So jump in and just feel free to interrupt if needed. So with that, let's go ahead and hop on in. We're going to get onto our shared screen and dive in to the wonderful world of career pathing. Okay. So when we're using this term career pathing, we're really talking about building a roadmap to help us align a sense of personal fulfillment and our strengths with opportunities that are in front of us. So that's how I like to conceive of this term career pathing. Now, oftentimes, when we're talking about career pathing, hold on, all of a sudden now it's giving me like a pen. Here we go. Can we go forward now? Hey, there we go. All right. So generally speaking, when we're talking about career pathing, which is often something that's done, say, at like work centers or college campuses, this is something we conceive of as being very linear, right? So it's like step one, step two, step three, step four. We're going to incorporate some of that today, but what I'm offering you is going to be far more iterative, right? So the way that I like to think about career pathing is really anchored in doing exploration work, discovery, reflection, skill mapping, and real world experimentation. I feel like this is more suited for real life conditions, right? Life isn't always linear. The path isn't always linear. So this is really about sort of getting into ourselves, getting into our strengths a little bit, and then being open to opportunities that are presenting themselves to us. Now, the unifying factor that we all share here today is going to be our connection to AmeriCorps, right? And our role either serving in AmeriCorps now or as an AmeriCorps alumni. And I always like to say AmeriCorps is the gift that keeps on giving. I can look back at my term of service, which now has been like 23 years. And if I pause and I reflect on it, I can still mine that for lessons, okay? So today, we're going to take your AmeriCorps term of service and invite you to really mine that for service. Now, I want to introduce a small framework to you to give you a sense of how we're going, and then one other framework to give you a sense of what we'll be doing. So we're going to anchor our reflection today in what's traditionally known as experiential learning, okay? Experiential learning theory. Now, oftentimes when I'm teaching, I'll introduce experiential learning and I'll say to the room, and who's heard of it? And all the hands go up and I'm like, right on, tell me what it means. And without fail, I get an answer that says something along the lines of, it's like learning through like experience, right? That's not quite it. So experiential learning isn't learning through the experience. It's learning by reflecting on the experience, okay? So we don't learn from the experience itself. We learn by reflecting upon it. So when we think about the gift of our AmeriCorps term of service, we have this rich experience, right? And we can mine that for meaning by reflecting upon it, by thinking about what happened, what we noticed, what we saw, what it means, and how we can move that into action. So today is really about inviting you to reflect upon your term of service and mining that for meaning. And we're going to use a particular framework that I really enjoy to guide our reflection. And that framework is called Ikigai. So, what we have in front of us is what is something that we traditionally refer to or can be referred to as a Japanese model for purposefulness. Now, there's some conflicting information about whether or not that's truly where this is rooted, but until we have additional information on it, I'll continue to attribute it there. But essentially, what this model does is introduce four central questions that we can ask ourselves in order to achieve our Ikigai or find that sense of purposefulness. Okay. So as we're going through today and reflecting upon our AmeriCorps term of service, we're going to do so through these four questions, right? So the first question is, what do you love? Next, what are you really good at? Then, what does the world need, right? Because we recognize that purposefulness is so attached to contributing and giving back. And then finally, what can we be paid for? So today really is iterative. It's about discovery. We're going to unpack that AmeriCorps experience by using those reflection tools, and the curiosities and questions that we're going to ask about that term of service will be guided through this Ikigai model of Japanese purposeful. Now, before we jump in, I do want to say this. What I share with you today from my personal experiences are going to be relative to the journey that I walked, but it's time for me to acknowledge that that journey took place 23 years ago. And while there's still elements that I'm using to this day and that are very much alive, there has been some good distance between when I was freshly out of AmeriCorps and how I navigated that and where you are now. And the facts are the game board has changed, right? The opportunities that were available to me, the boundaries that were available to me, all of those things have been shifted around quite dramatically. And we're seeing those things getting shifted around even more rapidly right now. So as we're going through this, if you're like, oh, that doesn't feel like a direct fit for my lived experience, or I'm having a hard time aligning that with what I'm seeing, I just encourage you to adapt and adjust the information I'm providing in a manner that does suit you. So nothing I'm providing to you here is like black and white. It can never be varied upon. I want you to feel free to make this your own and to think about it in the lens of the real world conditions that you're all facing. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. High level outcomes now that we've set the context a little bit. We're going to open up by exploring what drives you. So again, reflecting, using the Ikigai model, asking some questions, giving you chances to put pen to paper, and then discuss what you've learned. Then we will move into that more linear career pathing model. So I know some of you are very linear thinkers and you're like, Stober, just give me like point A, point B, point C. We'll get there once we've reflected. And then once we've had an opportunity to bring those two things together, going to give you a chance to actually say, okay, how can I move this forward? What are some concrete goals that I can set to incorporate what I've learned today? So with that, let's go ahead and hop on in. So we're going to start with our reflection, okay? So I'm going to introduce each of these Ikigai questions to you, give you a sense of how I interpret this, how I make meaning out of it, and then give you a chance to jot down ideas or things that are coming forward for you. So we're going to start with what you love, okay? What is it that you love? A key central part of this model. So when we're thinking about what we love, I like to define that as sort of where do I have passion? Where do I find joy, right? So this incorporates and captures the different activities and interests that drive me, experiences that create energy in me, the things that make time feel like it's going to disappear, what's bringing me excitement, or giving me that deep sense of joy and presence. A couple of indicators or things that we can look for to help us understand, like, where is that joy and passion centered? So the first way I like to encourage people to think about this is asking themselves, where are you experiencing flow states? I think flow state is a pretty kind of broadly held concept these days, but I want to break it down just in case you haven't been introduced to it before. So flow state is defined as when we are engaged in a task that is a perfect balance of competency and challenge, right? It has us sitting right on our learning edge. And when we're experiencing flow state, we become absent of time, right? So we're not depressed thinking about yesterday and we're not anxious thinking about tomorrow. We are completely present to that thing that we are doing in that moment. Sometimes we can describe this as a sense of play as well. And what we understand is that when we're experiencing flow or when we're experiencing play, it's going to take far fewer repetitions for our brain to lay neural pathways than it otherwise would. So there's some correlation between being in flow and the sense of play, right, and the growth and expansion of our brain and our abilities. But it tends to be a good indicator that we're doing something that we love, right? Time just slid by. You didn't even notice it. Another way that we can think about, ooh, is this something I love, is asking ourselves where we're experiencing positive obsession, right? Positive obsession. So what is that project that you're just like, oh, I can't wait to pick it up. I'm thinking about it before I go to bed. It's the first thing that hits me in the morning, right? What is that thing that you love playing with, you love engaging with? For me, that's writing curriculum. I love this work. I have positive obsession about this all the time. I can't tell you the number of times I have woken up in the middle of the night and all of a sudden I'm like, bam, that's the acronym that I've been looking for to help us define developmental feedback, right? And I'm up and writing that down at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm so positively obsessed with it, right? I love it. So that's another thing that you can look for. Another way we can consider what do we love is where are you self motivated? Where are you self initiated, right? There are certain chores and tasks that we might sit around and procrastinate and wait for somebody else to motivate us. But those things we love, those are the things that we get off the couch all on our own, right? We're moving towards it without any external drive. It's all coming internally. Another place that we consider, like, how does this help me understand what I love? Is where are you willing to learn and fail, right? So, where are you taking those risks? Where are you putting yourself out there? Where do you see failure as like, okay, that's okay. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep moving forward. So, those things that we continue forward, even though we're experiencing setbacks, also tend to be where we're experiencing something we love. I see Dana's getting the audio for us. Thank you. Another way that we consider what we love is by asking ourselves, where do we perform and go above and beyond expectations? So thinking about your term of service, what was that task you had or that role that you had that you just exceeded expectations, right? You knocked it out of the park. You were always going above and beyond because you were just driving. The final way that I like to think about, ooh, is this something that I love? Is asking myself, where am I receiving energy, right? Where am I walking away from something feeling really energized? Now, I want to use this concept of being energized to bring in an important tool for us as we're thinking about career pathing, which is this concept of introversion versus extroversion, right? Introversion versus extroversion. Now, again, I think this is a topic and a concept that has we're broadly holding these days, but let's go ahead and define it. So, introversion versus extroversion is essentially defining where we obtain energy. So, those of us who are very extroverted are going to get energy from the external world, right? So, by being around others, being in conversation, being in social situations, we derive energy from that. Those of us who are on the more introverted end of the spectrum are going to generate energy from our internal worlds, right? So when we're having the ability to do things independently, reflecting, reading, right, being in our internal world. Now, it's important to understand that this is a spectrum. It's not an either or, right? So you could be what we call an ambivert, which means you actually have pieces of both, which is where I land, okay? This matters when we're thinking about career pathing. I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen, say, an extrovert who's really interested in community gardening apply for a job just because it has to do with community gardening. That's about data entry, where they're going to be working by themselves, sitting at a computer all day, and they're not going to have energy because they're not meeting their extroverted needs. Conversely, I've seen introverts, they're the same thing. I want to work with community gardening. I'm going to go be the community outreach coordinator, but they know very well that that's going to deplete them and take energy away. So we're thinking about what we love. We consider all of those other questions, but we also want to ask ourselves, like, what are my energetic needs, right? What do I know about myself? And how can I use that information to pursue roles that will keep me in a positive energy field? So, with that, we're going to go into our first little reflection moment. So, I'm just going to invite you to take 3 minutes, right? Not that long, but long enough. And I want for you to play with the questions in front of you or any other questions or any other ideas that came up as we were talking about what we love. So, again, what excites you? Where might you experience flow? Do you have that positive obsession? How do you receive energy? So, again, I'm going to just stop talking here for about 3 minutes and we'll call back and then we'll move to the next question. Got about 1 more minute on this one. All right, friends. So I'll invite your attention just back to our shared Zoom room, back into the virtual reality. So again, we're reflecting, thinking about our term of service, what we know about ourselves, doing so through the lens of Ikigai, so that we can start to kind of pan out and think about how we create purposefulness in our lives and align that with our careers. So the first question we played with, what do we love, right? So where do we have flow state, positive obsession, and where might we be gaining energy? All really, really important things to consider when we're thinking about where we might head in the future. So the next question that we're going to play with then is, what are you good at? And sometimes the answers to these can be really similar, right? What do I love and what am I good at? And so I want to say, if you find that happening for you, that's the good stuff, right? That's what we're looking at. This is just another angle, another way for us to consider this. So when we're thinking about what we're good at, right, I like to categorize this as, what are those abilities, talents, skills, and expertise that you carry, things that maybe you either have access to naturally, that come easily for you, or things that maybe you have earned through practice and learning. Okay. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying, like, what is it that I'm really good at? I want to give you a framework to play with in terms of thinking about what you're good at. And that framework is known as mind styles. Okay. So mind styles is a dispositional theory. It comes from the work of a guy named Tom Kiersey. And it's similar, to things like the DISC analysis or Myers-Briggs or real colors or true colors. The reason that I love this particular model is its simplicity. And it's the ability to observe ourselves within it, and our ability to actually apply it to different situations. So what this model would assert is that each and every one of us has like a default state that we like to move to within our working conditions, right? So we all have this one default that we show up in. Now, oftentimes we'll have one and then some secondary ones, but understanding where we default to and where we gravitate towards is going to give us a really good sense of what we're good at, where we're showing up in service to others, and will give us some information around what might be a good fit for us moving forward. So I'll introduce these styles to you at kind of a high level. And as I'm going through that, I encourage you thinking about your term of service. Like, how have you been asked to work? Has that been a good fit for you? Where have you felt like, yes, this is good and aligned? I like working this way. Where maybe have you felt frustration? It wasn't actually meeting your working preferences. So we'll just play with this. Okay, so the first style in this model, right, our sort of working disposition, is what we call artisans. Okay, artisans. And artisans are people who are very much focused on action, doing things. They love the big picture. Artisans love spontaneity, right? So they like to make a call in the moment. Let's just see what happens. These folks tend to be very curious. They ask a lot of questions. They're very philosophical. I always say that our artisans are the type of people when you're like, hey, enough, 2 + 2 is 4, let's let it go. And they're like, yeah, but how do you know? That's a social construct, right? These folks tend to say they don't like structures, putting it mildly. Oftentimes, these folks are going to be actively trying to punch holes through structure, right? So if you give them a protocol or a process, they're looking for ways around it. They want to challenge it. And that's simply, again, because they're curious, because they want to try new things. Artisans tend to be very visionary. They have big ideas, right? They've got long range goals. And they're really good at taking risks, right? So they don't mind failure. They love starting new things. They don't always love finishing things, but they love starting new things, right? These people tend to sort of have a very confident but laid back and casual energy, right? They don't take themselves too seriously. Artisans also tend to be folks who will get a little bit impatient. So if the process is taking too long, or if we're taking too long to come up with a decision, if we're talking about feelings too much, that artisan's going to get frustrated, start shaking a pen, shaking their leg, like, let's just go. Okay. So those are our artisans. Next, we have guardians, and guardians represent sort of the opposite of our artisans. So our artisans like big pictures and taking risks and spontaneity. Guardians like task completion, right? So they like structure, they like order, they like predictability. Our guardians, whereas our artisans will push against structure, guardians require it. So if I walk up to a guardian and I hand them just a bucket of chaos, the first thing they're going to do is put that in order. Right. So they're going to be like, okay, what's the linear relationship? How do these things work together? Where are the tasks within that? Right. So when we take this orientation of task completion and put it into that linear thinking, we understand that our guardians are our list makers, our box checkers, right? Our process administrators. These folks live for the list, by the list, right? They get mad satisfaction out of seeing those small steps towards completion. As a result, sometimes we really interpret our guardians as being our workhorses, right? So they're incredibly reliable, incredibly dependable. If you ask a guardian to get something done and they say yes, you don't have to worry about it. You also don't have to worry about the quality of it because they tend to hold themselves to pretty high standards. They also tend to procrastinate, oddly, right? So our guardians have maybe an unhealthy relationship to stress or perfectionism, and they need that kind of sense in their body, that little bit of urgency to activate their efforts. Shadow sides of our guardians, these folks can get pretty controlling, right? So if you're not working on the list or you're not doing it to their standards, these are the folks who are like, just never mind, give it to me, I'll take care of it. So they can tend to take too much on, but again, very reliable, very productive individuals. Next, we have our idealists, and our idealists are our people. So artisans like action, guardians like task completion, idealists like people. They're very interested in group dynamics. They're very interested in interpersonal dynamics. They're very interested in sort of their own personal self-awareness. These are the folks that are really attuned to space and energy, right? They walk in the room, they're like, oh, it feels amazing in here. The light's amazing. Your aura, it's purple, right? They're just vibing out. They also tend to be very empathetic people. So these are the folks who might come by and say, like, is everything okay? Are you all right? And you're like, yeah, I'm fine. And they walk away, you're like, I'm not fine. But why do they know that, right? All of this is just because our idealists tend to make rapid work of taking in micro expressions, space, angles, body language, right? They're able to absorb that information and make meaning out of it really quickly. So even though this kind of sounds like woo-wooey and we're talking about kind of a loose concept of intuition, it tends to be fairly accurate, right? And these are the type of people who will say things like, I don't know why, but this is the right decision. And if we trust them, they tend to be onto something. Idealists are wonderful in terms of creating teams, team building. They're great delegators. The reason they delegate super well is because they're very flexible thinkers, right? So they're open to your ideas. They're open to how you might go about it. Very aware of how they're impacting others. Very much want to see growth and expansion in other people. We know we're around our idealists because they tend to just come across as very warm, very approachable. So they use a lot of pro-social body language, tend to have kind of an optimistic outlook on life, kind of are putting out that very inviting energy. Shout aside of our idealists, these folks are incredibly sensitive, right? So they want to know how everybody's feeling. They want to know how you're impacting them. They'll be the first ones to ask you for feedback. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I mean, you did great, I guess. So like if you could change this one thing since you're asking, and they're going to be like, all right, thanks. And then go home and kind of ruminate and spiral a little bit over that because they're just so aware of how they're showing up for people. So those are our idealists. And then finally, we have our rationals, right? And our rationals kind of represent the opposite of the idealist, okay? So the idealist is all about people. Rationals are about logic, right? Facts and figures, data, black and white thinking. That is what drives rationals, right? So in their mind, if we have the proper equation, we're taking the proper steps and we're using the right information, everything will sort itself out, right? We don't need to be concerned about the big picture, how people are feeling. We'll use a process to get there. Rationals tend to prefer working independently. So if you approach a rational and you're like, hey, can you work through this system for me? They're like, yes. And I don't need to do that as a group. I'll go take care of that. I'll do that systematically and I'll return to you, right? And when they're in that process, what they're doing is evaluating and looking for precision and accuracy, right? So it's like, okay, what's the goal and how do I get to it? And how can I make sure I replicate that, right? Streamlining, getting rid of all the noise, bringing us back just those most critical pieces. As a result, rationals tend to be wonderful at increasing efficiencies and can be incredibly strategic thinkers, right? They're able to, again, peel things back, find the most important elements, help us understand how to get there in a very, very direct manner. Rationals, because they are the least relational and again tend to want to work in isolation and very focused on smaller things, can appear cold, right? They can come off to some of us as if they don't like us. And really, that's not it at all. That's just the world that they're operating in. Shadow side of our rationals, they can be a little bit blunt, a little bit direct because they are so focused on black and white precision and accuracy. They're not always handling feelings or teams as well as they could. But again, if we understand where we're coming from, we can learn to not take those things so personally. Okay. So this is just one way for you to think about like, what am I good at? When you think about your term of service, like which one of these working styles were you being asked to perform in? Did it feel like a great fit for you? Were there frustration points for you? What does it tell you about how you like to work, right? How you like to bring your energy, what part of the workflow you're best in. So we're going to go ahead and move this. I think I keep losing my ability to click forward. I'm not sure why. Here we go. So I want to give you an opportunity now to like really think about like what are you good at, right? So this includes questions like what's your superpower? Like what are your big strengths? When is your work at its best, right? Thinking about those mind styles. Another way we can mine ourselves for what we're good at is by asking, like, what skills do other people rely on me for? What do people come to me for, right? That oftentimes shows that I'm good at something. And then what do you feel like you've mastered? So again, we're just going to do a quick 3 minutes to let you jot down some thoughts, and then we'll move to the next question. About 1 more minute on this question. All right. So I'll invite our attention back into the Zoom room, dipping in and out of our different realities here today. So again, thinking about what we've learned through our term of service by reflecting and reflecting through the questions of the Ikigai model. So we talked about what we love, right? That passion, flow state, where we get energy. And now we're talking about what are we good at, right? What have we mastered? Where are our talents? How do we like to work? And how can we be aligned with that? Before we move to our next question, I just want to share sort of some of my opinions around this idea of like, what are we good at? So I feel like culturally, we are super obsessed with addressing our weaknesses, right? So it's always like, well, here's where you can improve, and this is what you need to work on. And I think that we kind of miss the boat with that sometimes. So my position is when we're focusing on trying to address our weaknesses, that will help us to be average, right? So if I want to focus on my weaknesses, that's going to help me be average. However, if I'm clear on what my strengths are and I'm willing to focus and exploit my strengths, that's what actually makes us exceptional, right? So I just encourage you as you're thinking about this, like, what am I good at? Like, what is that unique talent? Like, where is that authenticity for me? And how can I exploit that, right? No matter what, we're always going to have a shadow side. We're always going to have a weakness. You know what I mean? It's good to monitor those things, but I just encourage you to not overly focus on that and really, really try and focus on your strengths. I think these are good questions for folks who want to play with this concept more. A great tool that you can use to further play with this is Strength Finders. So again, you can throw that one into the Google machine. You can do some Strength Finder assessment to get a little bit more accuracy around these things. But remember, exploit your strengths, right? Don't be afraid to exploit your strengths and to put your energy there. It doesn't always have to be focused on where we're weak and need to improve. Okay. So with that, we've talked about what we love and what we're good at. So we are going to boogie on towards the next question, which is what the world needs, right? What the world needs. And this one is really complex because when we're thinking about the what the world needs, oftentimes we're inviting ourselves to think about those causes that really drive us. And I recognize oftentimes for AmeriCorps members, this is a complicated question because we sort of care about all of it, right? Like we see how intertwined these things. We recognize the condition of the social fabric. We understand how economic factors influence health, right? And how equity influences economic factors. And it can be really, really challenging for us to pan back. But it's important to understand that our charge in life is not to deal with everything. It's to simply do something, right? Something. So it's important for us to understand like what are those causes that really activate me, right? And how can I apply myself to that? I was doing a civic engagement training last week for a group of women in Montana. And I was saying, right, like if each and every one of us picks up our thread, right? So my thread is like conservation, women's leadership, right? Those are the threads that are near and dear to me. If I pick up my thread and you pick up your thread and you pick up your thread, that's how we collectively begin to hold all of these causes together, right? So it's really, really important for us to be able to step back and take a moment to say, which are the ones that really drive me? What of this feels most important to me? Now, there's not much more context for this one other than that. We're going to move back into reflection here. And I've got a couple of questions for you to consider. Like, what is that cause that drive you? Or what are those couple of causes that you're like, those are the ones, that's what I want to focus on. That's how I want to make sure that I'm contributing to what the world needs. So some questions that we can use to sort of get into that for ourselves. One, what challenges have maybe you directly experienced or witnessed that drive you to want to create change, right? I always like to say, what are those things that cause you to be engaged or enraged, right? When we're hyper engaged or really enraged, there's a good chance that that's hitting with our values and those things that are central to self that we want to chase a little bit. Next, who do you feel most called upon to support and why, right? Like, what are those things that you're like, that's like, and when I see the animal shelter commercial, I'm bawling and I'm off the couch. I got to help the dogs, right? Like, nothing wrong with that. Like, where are you driven to action and emotion, and why do you think that is? This third question is really important, right? Like, where do your lived experiences give you a different level of credibility and a different level of access? So again, for me, like I have lived experiences as a cis woman. That's an experience I can speak to and I'm grounded in, right? So it's okay to sort of have the authority of our lived experience and use that to guide us. And then finally, if you could change one thing about the world, just one thing, what might it be? So again, we're going to do a quick 3-minute reflection for you to really think about like, what is that cause that compels you? What is that condition or that opportunity that drives you? And how do you see that as being something the world needs? So I'll call you back in 3 minutes. Do 1 more minute on this question. All right, I'm going to call us back into the Zoom room, back into the Zoom room. And thank you all. I've been scanning around and looking at folks who have their cameras on. It seems like folks are taking the opportunity and the invitation to jot thoughts down and kind of be in the experience. So thank you for folks who are feeling invited into that. So we're going to go into our final question here. So we've already done, what do I love? What am I good at? And what does the world need? And so now we're going to explore what can we be paid for, right? What can we be paid for? And this is going to be a trickier one, right? This is where that game board has changed, and we're looking at some of the synthesis. So, just going to introduce a couple of questions for you to play with here, and then we're going to move into our breakout group so that you can explore this a little bit more with others, because sometimes this is where we're hitting the boundaries of our experiences, and we're not exactly sure where to take it. Okay. So, when we're thinking about what can I be paid for, a couple of questions, right, that we can think about. So, number one, what are the skills, knowledge, or services that you currently offer that people would be willing to pay for, right? What are those things that you can actually bring into a working environment that hold that value proposition for people, right? So, what are those things that you currently are doing that actually are marketable in that way? Next, kind of thinking about the ground you stand on now, right, and the experiences that you currently carry in your life. From what you understand, right, what other opportunities might exist in your field or your industry that could align with your strengths and your interests, right? So thinking about just sort of where you currently have experience, what you can see and what you can touch, what types of things appear to be available. And then finally, right, there's this whole idea of like, we don't know what we don't know. So when you're thinking about what's available, that's coming strictly from what you know. So how can you expand what you know? Where can you look? Who can you talk with, right? How might you go about discovering new opportunities to get an even better sense of where you might align your skills and interests? So we'll do this final little reflection. Again, we'll just do 3 minutes, let you jot down some ideas, and then we'll go into the breakout group so that we can talk further with our peers about this. Do 1 more minute on this final question. All right. Go ahead and invite you back to the Zoom room. I'm going to drop my shared screen. So again, we're going to move into some breakout groups just to give you an opportunity to discuss what's coming forward for you. So going back to when we were talking about introversion and extroversion, we often really think about that as where we get energy, which is a huge component of it. But it's also related to how we process information. So, what we understand is introverted individuals tend to process internally before they speak, right? Which we've given a lot of opportunity here for. Extroverts need to process externally in order to get their thoughts together. So, the breakout group is really an opportunity to meet the needs of our extroverted participants, as well as to begin to get a sense of what it feels like to crowdsource information. So, in your groups, just going to invite you, there'll be 3 or 4 of you in there. Take a moment, introduce yourselves, and then I want for you just to share out like, here's some of the answers that are coming forward for me. Here's where I'm seeing some patterns and themes, and see if they have other ideas for types of jobs or opportunities you might be looking for. So it's simple introduction, high level patterns, themes, what's coming out of my reflection, and then inviting other people to share potential opportunities with you. So you'll be in that group for 10 minutes. When we come back, I would love if you would identify one person from each of your group who would be willing to share out with the rest of us, just to give us a high level overview of what you talked about. So Dana is going to shoot out your great breakout group invitations now. We'll see you in 10 minutes, and hopefully a few of you will be willing to share out how that goes. See you in a bit.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to send you all to your groups. If you're feeling introverted today, don't leave. You could just come back to the main session if you really don't want to be in a breakout room. We don't want to lose you. And we're going to do one other breakout room after this, just to give you a heads up, right, Shannon? So there'll be 2 today, and this is the first one, and you'll be going in the same group again, right, Shannon?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So here are your new friends. I'm going to send you an invitation. All right, looks like you all got your invitations. And if you don't want to be in a group, just come back and mute yourself and turn off your camera for a few minutes so we don't have to lose you. I always like to give people that option.
I think it's a good one.
Okay, we'll see you all in 10 minutes.
Do we want to pause the recording, Dana, so we don't have the 10-minute bubble here?
Thank you. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, you bet. Now we have to remember to restart it.
I know, right? I'll put a note on it. Remind me if I don't say something.
I'll do my best. It looks like somebody is unassigned. Oh, Cheryl's like, let me in. Cheryl, we'll kick you into a group. Let
Cheryl
me
and
see.
Taylor, do you need a room? Okay, cool. Let me
There
pause
we
this and
go.
I'll move you.
I was just going to tell you.
You got the recording back.
Sober, I was going to tell you, your fast talking is just Coloradoan language. That's what we do.
I love it. Well, so what's funny, I saw that you put, where in Colorado are you from?
Fort Collins, Northern
Oh,
Colorado.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
my folks live in Wellington now, so they're just
Okay.
north of Fort Collins.
Yep.
But what's funny is my parents are from New Jersey, right? And they literally moved to Denver in the 70s because of John Denver. And so frequently people ask me, they're like, "Are you from Jersey?" And I'm like, "No, I'm from Colorado, but I think there's some interesting nature versus nurture stuff in there too."
Yeah. West Virginia
Did,
folks, you talk way too fast for me. I'm like, I'm sorry.
it is what it is. And sometimes if I really focus on slowing down, I oddly start to lose my train of thought, right? So it's like one of those things where I just have to be in my cadence. So
Yeah. Same for me.
welcome. Yeah, awesome. Welcome back, friends. So hopefully for those of you who like process that way and are interested in that, that felt meaningful. So I did leave some space here and would love it if I could get a couple other voices into the room. And real quick, if you guys want to mute, let's all make sure we're muted real quick. Let's see if we can find the person who's not.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll get it. Just a second, Shannon.
It's okay. Okay, I think we're good. So I'd be so grateful if a handful of you would be willing just to kind of share out, like, here's what we talked about, or maybe a personal reflection you had, or potentially even questions. So would love to invite, if you want to, you can raise a real hand or a Zoom hand, and then I can just call on you. So I'm going to sit back and invite some other folks to put their voice. Yes, is it Jonah Leah Ellis? Is that right? Did I say it right?
It's Jonnalee.
Jonnalee, sorry. I'm like, Jonah Leah. Well, now Jonnalee. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Jonnalee, share.
So I was in a breakout room with Ava, Robin, and Kendra. I think that's right. But very lovely individuals. We mainly discussed the questions that were asked, like your superpower, your experiences, and we all very much had very different answers. But our attention to wanting to better our communities and where we're at is like the same goal. What I've noticed is like we all have our own personal strengths. So as for mine, and I believe Ava did mention that we both have like a more attention to detail or visuals. But what sets Ava aside from me was that they were more interested in like writing and grant writing, and that's like the opportunity that they had. While Robin more discussed her involvement with her community with drug counseling and such like that, and Kendra with the disability services. I honestly, it was very eye-opening to speak with these individuals. It was very, we did talk about like a matter of perspective as well, and I just like seeing other people's perspective and why they're doing what they're doing.
I love it. Thank you for that. And it's such a beautiful kind of representation, right, of the community fabric. Like, pick up our thread. So, this is my superpower, my skill, what I'm interested in. And the more we all align with that, the stronger we can make our community. So that was beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Would love to hear from a couple others. Real hands or Zoom hands? Yeah, Ryan, let's go.
So we kind of we kind of talked about like our experiences. I'm a fourth year member. I'm in the place of like figuring out life after AmeriCorps, and like I have invested like I was able to invest time into like getting my degree. Like I started college, so like I started the AmeriCorps, then I started college, and like I graduate this summer, so like I'll be like in my fourth term with a degree. And like I've also like taken classes about like grant writing and that kind of stuff, and like um I don't know, I was able to really rebuild myself. I was formerly incarcerated. I started AmeriCorps shortly after incarceration. I was also like homeless and I'm now person in recovery. I'm a person in recovery as well. So like I was in this place of like rebuilding my life, and I like being in the AmeriCorps, and like all the skills that I've gained, the trainings, all of the social equity, all the community connections, all of like the different experiences with like utilizing my life and giving back to being able to give back to the community and use my experiences as strengths was like it. And I really just like think that it's a really, really unique and like beautiful gift the AmeriCorps does. Is like it gives, and if you what you put in throughout your time as an AmeriCorps is what you will get out. And like that's real. It's very real. Like for me, it was like life changing. And now I'm like, I know I have a career, I'm free, I'm a person of value, a leader in my community. And I know when my time with AmeriCorps is done that like I am ready for life after that. So it's all about what you put in.
Snaps for that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I love it, right? Because I agree with you. It's like you get out what you put in. And it sounds like this has been transformational for you in so many ways. And I'm so excited to see sort of where you go next. So thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate your willingness. That's great.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Let's see. Would somebody else be willing to share again? Personal? Yeah, Jaden, I see your real hand up.
Sorry, I couldn't find the fake one.
That's all right.
In our group, I was in a group with Kayla, Robin, not Robin. Yeah, Robin and Megan.
And we talked a lot about like the introvert, extrovert, um, and just like how each of us kind of see ourselves, like what category we fall into. And I think all of us almost had the same kind of thing, situation going on where we were we would fall under like extrovert when it comes to serving because I think that we're all like very vocal and like personable when it comes to like talking to people that we encounter when we're serving. But then in our personal lives, aside from serving, we're more like introverted into ourselves and stuff like that. And I think that, it was nice to be able to talk to that all of us kind of had the same understanding because we would both, or all of us share that same experience.
Hmm. I love that. And actually, Dana and I had a really similar discussion, right? In thinking about, social needs, how they might be met through work versus being met through personal life, and, overextending one way or another, how that can impact the overall sort of balance of our lives. So I love that you played with that concept. And it's such an important one. And what we were talking about too is like, this isn't a fixed state. So for me, prior to COVID, I was off the chart extroverted. And so I really struggled during the initial months of COVID because I wasn't able to feed myself in that way. But that also let this little introverted version of me bloom, right? And got to know her, and she's pretty rad, and she kind of took over. And so it's this dance, right? So of noticing those changes and being aware. So I love that you guys played with that concept. Thanks, Jaden. Would anybody else be willing to share? Maybe one more person. Love to hear some other thoughts or insights. Josh, yeah, fire away.
Yeah, so my group, we talked a little bit about the introversion and extroversion also, and like how that plays into the workplace. And then what we mostly discussed was like goals um, afterwards, and like how everybody um, sees their interactions at their service site playing into their goals afterwards. Like me personally, I plan on going back to work in the substance abuse field because that's what's like really important to me. But that's well down the road because I have to go back and get a bachelor's and a master's degree before I do that. So the
Hmm.
education award is like super awesome boon that's going to help with that for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much what we went over. Just everybody's goals, aspirations, and whether or not those aligned with being like introverted or extroverted.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you for that, Josh.
No
And
problem.
truly, you could not have set us up for the next part that we're going to cover here any better, right? So I'm going to move us back over to the shared screen and introduce kind of again this more linear structured approach. So strongly encourage folks like be in that position of reflection. Take that time to look back and mine your experiences for meaning in terms of like, what do I love? What am I good at? Like, what has my attention in terms of where I want to create social impact? And I think this should be an ongoing practice for folks, right? So for myself, I'm regularly taking time to do that work to make sure that the internal and the external are as aligned as they possibly can. But with that, I know my guardians who love their linear thinking and want those check boxes are going to want this process. So I'm going to flip this over to give us some tools in terms of how we can start to align this with goals. And then we'll start wrapping up our time together. So shared screen should be pulling up from our last reflection question. Dana, are you seeing my shared screen? Thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, friends. So we're going to move it forward now into how we can actually turn this into a plan for ourselves. All right. And this part will move pretty quickly. And I'll tell you a little bit about my journey as we're going through this as well. So now that we have this information, we have these experiences, we have a sense of sort of what makes us feel most purposeful. The first thing that I encourage people to do is just to create a simple vision for yourself, right? So if you were doing something you loved and expressing your superpowers and your talents and having a good impact on the world and making a little money doing that, like what could that look like for you, right? How would you characterize that? How would you define that? Where are you? Who are you with? Right? We undervalue sometimes the importance of sort of creating those visions. which really become our North Star and help to guide us. So when we're thinking about all of this reflection work, we should be able to put that together with some kind of a vision for the future, who we are in the future. So once we've done that, now we're going to start to nail it down. So you've got this vision, you've got this sense. Then I tell people, okay, identify 3 potential jobs, just 3 potential jobs that might get you nearer to that vision, right? I often like to say one of those jobs you should identify that's directly in relationship to what you're doing now, right? So similar to the work you're expressing, the sector that you're in, the role that you currently carry. Another one maybe should be something that would take some of those skills, but put them into a different sector, right? So what would it look like for me to transfer what I have done publicly to the nonprofit sector, or what I've been doing for nonprofits, maybe to a private entity doing social impact? And then finally, that third one, man, that should just be a wild card, right? Like something you don't really know about, you kind of have a sense about, maybe kind of curious. So just start with 3 potential jobs, long term. This is who I would like to be in the future. Next, and this is the step that really matters, is to actually find people who are holding those jobs or are hiring for those jobs and reach out and ask them if they would give you 15 minutes to do a discovery interview. Just 15 minutes. Hey, I'm thinking about my next steps. I'm curious about this field or this position. Would you be willing to give me 15 minutes just to ask you some questions, right? And in those 15 minutes, things that I'm hoping to see, would you mind sharing a position description with me so I can get a sense of what are the responsibilities of this job? What are the roles of this job? I'm asking questions about like introversion, extroversion, right? I'm asking questions about social impact. Then I'm going to get to some really important ones, which are, what are the qualifications for this job? What would I need to be carrying with me for you to be even willing to give my application a look? And then finally, beyond the qualification, who's the ideal candidate? Who is the perfect person for this job? So again, you're just taking data in, gathering additional information to give yourself a sense of what are these positions or roles really like? How would you be even qualified to do it? And then what would make you the best person for that job? That's step 1. Vision, identify a couple potential jobs, and actually contact the hiring managers. Now, I'll tell you, I train on this topic quite a bit. And the people who take this step, who actually call the hiring managers, are usually the ones who send me a little note and say, Stober, that was so helpful. Like I actually got an internship there. Or, they were willing to consider me for an entry-level job to move me in that direction. I've also been on the other side of this when I was working with, organizations and not necessarily self-employed, where people would reach out and ask me these questions. And you better believe at the end of that call, I'm like, now what's your name again? How do I get in touch with you? Because I really like how proactive you are. So don't underestimate the power of this. It can be really, really helpful. Once you've done that, now we're moving into step 2, right? And this is where we're going to take the information that we got from that activity and actually do a little bit of a gap analysis for ourselves. So I'm going to say, okay, these are the jobs that I'm interested in. These really are compelling. I would like to be able to make my way towards that sometime. What are the skills and assets, right? What are the requirements to do that job? So I'm going to put all that together. And then I'm going to say, okay, cool. Of that, what do I have and what do I need to get, right? So I've got 70% of what would make me qualified for that. Okay, I need to fill this gap. I need to learn how to write a grant. I need to learn how to design websites. I need to gain supervision skills, whatever it is. And that, my friend, that's the goal. That's what it looks like to career path. So you're going to take those and translate that into a goal of, my next job isn't my forever job. My next job is a job that aligns with what I love, how I enjoy working, right? That also gives me the ability to say, I can supervise. I know how to write a budget now, right? So we begin to look at these things as these small steps to gathering skills to continue to become the person who is most qualified for where we want to be. So that's the art of this gap analysis, right? Beginning to think about our career path as going along a pathway in a garden and sort of pulling skills and assets that we're going to need in order to fully realize ourselves in the future. I feel like this is so helpful for people, right? When instead of thinking about how do I make this big leap, it's simply what is the next step? And here's the deal, my friends, a personal goal is not that helpful unless it's well written. So this is where the art of the SMART goal comes into play. Now, rarely an AmeriCorps member do I encounter who is not familiar with the concept of a SMART goal, but I still want to make sure we're all clear on what this is, because the better the goal, the more likely you are to complete it. So perhaps you've identified, I need to learn how to do a budget. I need to learn how to supervise, whatever that is. You're going to take that and you're going to make it SMART. So first, S, you're going to make that goal as specific as you possibly can, right? So what exactly are you going to achieve? Why do you want to achieve it, right? Really put character and texture to that. The more specific, the more likely you are to reach it. Next, M, measurable. So how will you know if you've accomplished it, right? What will you be able to see? What will you be able to count? What will you be able to do? Next, A, ask yourself, is this achievable? So this is really where we want to make sure we're right sizing our goal, right? We're creating the right size goal. So perhaps you're like, yeah, I need to learn how to do a budget, but you don't actually even know how to read an accounting sheet yet. So maybe instead of jumping right to a budget, you're setting a goal of reading an accounting sheet, right? So making sure the proper steps are there and that what you're putting in front of you is achievable. R is about relevance. For me, I like to think about relevance in terms of panning all the way back. What did I reflect upon, right? What are these aspirations I have? Who do I want to be in the future? And in the process of writing this goal, did I stay in integrity to that? Was anything lost? So just making sure that that goal is still aligned with your intentions. And then finally, T, time bound, right? So we live in a space-time continuum. It's how we measure things. So actually putting dates on things, right? I want to apply to 3 jobs by this point. I want to have this skill by this time next year. Putting dates on that is what's going to allow us to take this big goal and move it into the day-to-day, month-to-month targets that we can pursue to know we're moving towards it, okay? So you got your vision, you identified a few jobs, you did a little bit of discovery work. Through that discovery work, you got a better picture of what you would need to obtain and who you would need to be to have that position. You've done a gap analysis and identified the things you need to pick up, and you've put those into SMART goals. The final step then is actually just preparing yourself to put yourself out into the market so that you can figure out where those next steps are, who you're applying to, what it is you're going to do. So a couple of things that I want to mention as we talk about being prepared. First of all, as you're leaving your AmeriCorps term of service, make sure that you update your resume, right? I always get these questions about how do we talk about AmeriCorps on our resume? So there's a few things that I want to mention. Number one, do not call yourself a volunteer. Do not put your AmeriCorps term of service under the header of your volunteer experiences. What you're doing right now is public service. This is part of a highly sophisticated strategic national effort to get things done in communities across AmeriCorps. So do not undersell yourself by referring to this as a volunteer experience or naming this as your role as a volunteer. Okay, so that's a big part for me. Number two, oftentimes I see people that are coming out of AmeriCorps and putting it on their resume. And instead of saying I was an AmeriCorps member, they say things like I was the volunteer coordinator, right? I was the outreach coordinator. So they're taking sort of the role that they had and the activities they were working on, and they're adopting that title because they think that's going to make them look more competitive, that's going to give them a different edge. I want to tell you that's not true. Like, name that you were an AmeriCorps member, name that you completed a term of service, capture your efforts under that header. Again, I can tell you as somebody who's been on the hiring side, and obviously I'm kind of in group here, right? I'm into AmeriCorps, but saying I was an AmeriCorps member is much more powerful than saying I was a volunteer coordinator. So own that term. Now, as you're describing your term of service, I think sometimes folks like to really capture what they accomplished. Here's what I accomplished during my term of service. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but what you really want to do is talk about how you did it, not necessarily what you did, how you did it, because how you did it is what's transferable. So how you did it, right? You're like, I facilitated meetings. I worked in a team. I did project management oversight. It's the how that's transferable. So again, as you're thinking about your resume, you're not a volunteer, you're a public servant, you're an AmeriCorps member, hold that as such. Feel free to name, this is what I accomplished, but make sure you're also clear about how you got to those accomplishments, because it's the how that's super transferable, okay? So number one, update that resume. Number two, I cannot emphasize the importance of doing mock interviews enough. I can't tell you how many people I know in my world that have wonderful resumes, wonderful backgrounds, are incredibly skilled, right? That will still have a hard time getting into the jobs they want because they don't interview well. What's kind of fun about being in an AmeriCorps program is you're generally surrounded by people who truly want for you to succeed and grow and expand. And they're oftentimes likely the type of people who would be willing to sit down and mock interview with you. So I really encourage you to practice interviewing, practice giving your answers, get feedback on that. The interview piece is so important. Okay, next, and I think some of you are alluding to this. While you are still in service, know who your network is, understand who the people are that you're in proximity to, ask for introductions, go to other meetings, try and meet people, shake hands, say hello. Truly, my friends, it does matter what you know, but who you know is a big part of it. And it's not necessarily like nepotism, like, well, I know them and I get the job. But these are the people who make you aware of opportunities, who maybe can help you see based on what you're looking for, this might be a good role for you. They help us understand what we didn't know. Okay. So work that network, shake those hands, build relationships, make yourself a little bit memorable. For my introverts, yes, this is going to require us to go into a little bit more social energy, but it's so important for you to capture that network for yourself, so you can continue to be a member of that and leverage it and contribute to it moving forward. And then finally, especially for my AmeriCorps members who are maybe coming towards the end of your term of service, just ask for what you need. What do I mean by that? Just say, hey, host site supervisor, I got an interview on Friday, so I need to not be here Friday morning, right? Or maybe you're somebody who like doesn't have a printer and you need to print off your resume in the office. Just ask for what you need. Sometimes I kind of giggle. It turns out we all know that you're leaving, right? AmeriCorps members are with us through a certain date, and we know you're leaving, and we know you're going to need a little bit of time to strategize around that. Yet sometimes AmeriCorps members are kind of moving a little bit secretively, right? And it's like, no, like ask for what you need. Pay attention. Don't put down your service, right? Still continue to contribute and do what you're there to do. But we all know you're in a period of transition, and it's okay if you're like, can you introduce me to somebody? Can I print off a copy of my resume? I've got an interview. Would you mock interview with me? And then Friday, I need about an hour so I can do that. So just be transparent and trust that the people surrounding you want you to succeed. Okay. So my friends, this is what we're talking about, career pathing, right? We're going to do reflection. We're going to think about ourselves through the system of Ikigai. What do I love? What does the world need? What am I good at? What can I get paid to do? And then we can put that into this nice structured system, right? Of like, what's my vision? How do I begin to think about next steps in terms of skills or experiencing that I'm acquiring? And how do I set myself up for success? And while we talk about this as it's this very straight line, right? The reality is it's never straight. It's never going to be from point A to point B. It's always going to be really iterative. So I want to wrap our time up today by telling you a bit more about my personal career path, what I like to refer to as the cosmic highway, and how we can start to begin to build some trust in whatever direction it is that we end up going. So I gave you kind of the high level, linear overview of my background. So I, graduated college. I did 2 terms of service, and then I went into several staff roles in the AmeriCorps community. But I want to back up to give you a sense of some of the twists and turns in that story, just to give you some additional ways to think about this. So I'd mentioned to you my first job after AmeriCorps was working in Serve, Montana, right? And my job there was as the training officer. And I was there for 3 years and I really, really loved the role. But as I mentioned, the big P politics were not great for me. So it was like every year I got a new supervisor, and that was keeping me from really expressing myself and my mission. So I was starting to think that maybe I should consider my next steps, but I hadn't really done anything about it yet. So I'm at a conference one day and I am talking to one of the individuals that ran the campus-based AmeriCorps program, right? So the executive director of that office. And I knew he was hiring for a program director. So I just sort of casually asked him, I was like, hey, how's that going? How's that going hiring for that position? And he looked at me and he just said, what would it take for you to apply? Now, I had never even thought about that job, right? And I literally laughed and I go, God, I guess you asking, right? I guess you asking. Like, it turns out maybe I am interested in going a different direction. I hadn't really thought about this as an option, but since you've asked, now I'm curious. So I went ahead and I applied for that job. It was really rigorous. It was competitive, but I ended up getting it. They made the job offer to me and I was like, yeah, you know what? I am going to do this. Like, I'm going to take this leap. So I accept the job and I send the email out to the AmeriCorps community that I was working with through Serve Montana. Like, dear colleagues, it's bittersweet. I let you know I'm going to be leaving this position, but I'll still be a member of our community because I'll be working with this other organization, right? Within a few minutes, I get an email back from the Montana Conservation Corps, which I had always been obsessed with. These guys are baddies, right? And I was like, oh, I would never be cool enough to work in that organization. Like, they're so awesome. I get an email back and they go, oh, you're kidding us. We are announcing another position at the end of the week, and we were going to ask you to apply for it. I said, what's the job? And they said, it's a development coordinator helping us do fundraising work. And when I tell you my gut dropped, I was like, oh my God, I just made this commitment. I just said yes to this other thing. I didn't know that this would even be an option. And now I'm really conflicted because I've accepted this job. And I remember just sitting at my house over the weekend, right? And they're like, Shannon, we'd love, here's the job. We would love for you to apply, and just thrashing, right? Well, I already made this decision. It was public, but I think I'd rather do this. But I came to the conclusion, right? I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick with the commitment I made. I said I'm going to this job, and that's what I'm going to do. So I never applied for the role at the Conservation Corps. I accepted the campus-based job and I moved. Okay. Within weeks, I was like, oh man, I made the wrong call, right? Immediately, I was like, oh no, like, I don't think I like this job. It was really bureaucratic, so much grant management, so much financial management. And I could just feel in my bones, right? I was like, this isn't it. And I spent the next year just thrashing, just kicking myself, right? Oh, I can't believe that I didn't chase that other opportunity. I made this big mistake, right? And had all of this sort of like just this feeling of disappointment and regret. Lo and behold, 1 year later, Montana Conservation Corps calls again. And they said, Shannon, we got another position that we're going to open up. We'd love for you to consider it. And it was the position as their program director, right? Not the development coordinator, program director. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to make this same mistake twice. I'm going to apply for this job. I applied for that job, and it was incredibly competitive. People from all over the country, internal candidates, multiple rounds of interviews, but I got that job. And the only reason I got that job is because of the year I had spent operating as a program director with the other organization. Okay. That was what gave me the step up. This was one of the most enlightening experiences I have ever had in my life, right? In terms of trusting the process, trusting that things come together the way that they're supposed to come together, right? I don't want to do development work. I'm not a grant writer. I'm a program person, right? I like doing programming. I like doing training, right? MCC allowed me to do all those things, right? That I'm most passionate about. I just had to make a stop along the way to grab a little bit of an experience that was going to position me to be the best candidate for that role. And that's how I want for you all to be thinking about this, right? I think oftentimes when we're career pathing and thinking about our next step, it really is like, where do I want to be in the future? How do I get there? We overthink these things. But the truth is, oftentimes we do carry a little bit of an internal knowing that's going to coax us and push us in the directions that we want to be. Okay. So just remember, none of this is finalized. It's iterative, right? We don't always know what it is we're getting. We don't know what relationships we're building or what skills we're adapting. Sometimes we just have to trust what our body is telling us, even if it doesn't completely pencil out on paper. Okay. So for me, I want to wrap up our time by using a quote that is so important in my life, in the work that I do, which is, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. When I step back and I look at all these ikigai questions, really it's an invitation to say, like, what makes you feel most alive, right? So when I look at around the world and all the causes that I care about, right? Like, well, how am I showing up in that? By teaching, by facilitating, by creating spaces like this. Like, teaching makes me feel most alive. It's what I love. I'm actually pretty dang good at it. Turns out I can get paid to do it. And while I'm not necessarily addressing any social issue precisely, I get to work with all of you who are out there picking up your piece of the fabric, right? So when we think about Ikigai, that's the invitation, is to think about, like, what makes me come alive? How do I turn that into my vocational expression? And how do I change the world with it? And when we think about it that way, we begin to understand that Ikigai is not a target. It's something that we get to experience occasionally if we're lucky, right? So don't think about, ooh, all 4 of these questions have to be answered and it has to be perfect. It really is about just staying iterative, staying in the process, checking in with ourselves. How alive do I feel? What's happening around me? How can I trust myself to continue moving forward? So hopefully this all makes sense for you folks. I know we have covered so much content today, right? We're thinking about these different ways to reflect and what we can know about ourselves and how we can put that into the process, but then really, really understanding and recognizing that the process is never linear and it's something that we just have to be present to and trust. So I want to give us one last opportunity to move into breakout groups, right? And this is just a way for us to start teasing out what really stood out for you today. What was a concept or an idea that reminded you of something, gave you an aha moment? What are those insights that you want to move forward? And then what are 3 concrete actions that you can take following this webinar in order to move your learning forward? So what stood out? What are 3 concrete actions that you can take in order to move your learning forward? So Dana's going to put you back into those same groups. Again, we'll give you about 10 minutes to just big insight. How will I move it forward? We'll come back into the Zoom room one more time. We'll do some sharing out. And then, of course, I'll be available. That's a new way to pronounce that word. Available to do some Q&A if folks would like. So Dana, if you want to shoot out invitations, we'll see you all back here in about 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody. All right, we still got about 10 seconds left and we have some folks chatting. So we'll give them a moment and then we'll start moving towards some closing thoughts. All right. Okay, I believe that all the rooms were closed, so welcome back, everybody. So we're going to start wrapping up our time together, and I would love to kick us off similar to last time by inviting a couple of you to maybe share out what came out of that discussion in terms of what are the insights, how are people thinking about taking action. So we can start there and then leave a little bit of time for just Q&A for folks who would like it. Yes, and she's back, and I'm going to say it wrong again. So unmute. It's not Jonah Leah, and honestly, my eyes are not working good, so I'm seeing it blurry. But tell me your name once again.
Jonnalee.
Jonnalee. All right, Jonnalee, fire us off.
Okay, so I took pictures of the questions so I know what to like reinstate them. What stood out to you most today? How we discussed that was just the overall meeting that we discussed. So I'm talking fast like I'm timed. My bad. But I know for me, what stood out the most was how we're supposed to feel more confident in how we address ourselves or how we label ourselves as AmeriCorps members. I didn't realize how important that verbiage was for our resumes. And I do know that Kendra also had the same like conclusion, and there was like significant insights or ideas you've gained, and that's just, I mean, networking and being so involved with your community, that those are such great insights to really strengthen yourself as an individual, but also as a member of society or a member of AmeriCorps. And we did go over the 3 concrete actions really quickly. I know the main one that was agreed on was networking. Just being able to go out to your community or just being involved with those around you, either at your site or just in your community, is so important. And that's just how you manage just to build the step ladder to where you want to be and where you want to go. I know from Ava's perspective, being just a recent high school graduate, like it's just such, I believe she described it as like such a long road of like opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Thank you for the killer report out again. That was wonderful. And I'm really happy, that the piece around how we capture ourselves as AmeriCorps members stood out. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about, obviously. And then networking, right? And we're not able to deep dive into networking today, but here's what I would love to say. When we're networking, it works best when we're networking and trying to figure out how to help other people, right? So how to be of service. So asking good questions, listening, offering ourselves in a manner that supports them in meeting a need or moving towards an opportunity. And that's how we begin to build relationships. So as you're out there networking, remember it's about listening, understanding, and helping others, which deepens relationships and sets us up. So awesome. Wonderful. Thanks. Let's hear from a couple others. Who else would be willing to share? Just high level insights. Yeah, Kayla, let's go.
So I was in the group with Jaden and Megan, and we basically discussed, I think Jaden and Megan are both on their first year of serving with AmeriCorps. I'm on my second year. Uh, for me personally, I'm attending college right now, so I know that after AmeriCorps, I will be able to go straight into that job field that I'm going to college for. And the other, Jaden and Megan, they're going to get the education award to be able to pay off their student loans. So I feel like all of us collectively have a roadmap for the next 3-4 years planned out. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, and thank you for that, right? And it's so exciting. I love seeing the connection of how many of you are doing education attainment and then using your education awards that way. And so I would still say encourage you like those little micro things, right? So as you're completing your term of service and wrapping up in school and getting your degree, kind of continue to pay attention to like what's the exact job I want and what are some of these other small skill sets that I might get so that when I leave college, I have that little extra boost. And one thing I didn't mention that I definitely should is that sometimes when we're like looking at those skill gaps that we need to fill, sometimes the best way to fill those is by volunteering, right? So I know for myself, a lot of the skills that I needed, I was able to get those things done as a volunteer. So there's room to sort of think about how you might be of additional service and volunteer and gain some skills. So thank you, Kayla. That's wonderful. All right. Who else? Who else? Who else would be willing to share? Let's do one more. You can do it. One more. Yeah, Sharon, way to step into the void.
So, not so much a comment on what we discussed because it's basically been said, but I wanted to comment on the networking part.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that I was never really big into networking. I'm an ambivert, but networking was never really my thing. Until I realized networking is not about asking, but giving. And we're the kind of people that tend to give more easily. So when I realized that just sharing an idea that I had heard of that might work for the person that I was being introduced to or meeting or chatting with, that made it so much more comfortable for me because I felt I had something to offer as opposed to being the person in need. So consider that you know a lot of things through your service, whether it's, oh, you happen to see a grant or you happen to know somebody else who might be able to help this person. And that's often a very easy way to do that. It also is not just about the people who you meet through your AmeriCorps service. You can do this at the supermarket, at the gas station. Networking, I have learned, is about every human being you have the opportunity to interact with. And it comes back to you in many ways. It might not be exactly what you think it should be or could be, but lots of things come back to you. So I just wanted to, and
Thank
that's
you
it.
for that, Sharon. No, here. And again, I could not agree with you more, right? And for me again, I call it the cosmic highway. Like you never know who you're going to meet and why you're meant to meet them. So I really appreciate that. All right, friends, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I know that it's been a long one and we've tested your introverted and extroverted boundaries. But before we wrap up, I did want to see if anybody had any questions, anything else they wanted to offer in terms of tips or strategies. So got a couple of minutes left here. If anybody else would like to hop into the void, questions, insights, resources? I'll let it hold
I
there
have a
for just a
question.
Yeah, Deborah, go for
Debbie.
it. Debbie.
I'm on my third year
Mm-hmm.
and I love it. I've experienced everything from homeless to food pantries and everything else. And now I'm with the senior program. I love what I'm doing. But at 63, I don't have those same goals as to getting a job. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not there anymore. But so I want to keep my volunteering. But what do you suggest for those of us who are an older LifeBridge AmeriCorps person going into, now I'm looking at seniors doing maybe senior corps or something like that. But I wish I knew all this stuff back when in my 20s
I
that
know.
you're
I
going
just like
over
stumbled
now.
into it. I hear you, right? For me, it was like I just sort of tripped and fell into it and learned it by reflecting, like, how did that go? Debbie, I so appreciate the question. So I want to make sure I understand. So just thinking about it, it's like, it's not like this long, like, who do I want to be? It's sort of like, how do I
Yeah.
want to continue to really use my vitality, right? And really remain present. And so I love senior corps and all of the senior corps programs, right? So I think if you look into senior corps, you have that umbrella, you have the sense of community, the way that you're walking alongside people in public service. So I think that's a wonderful way to explore it. But Debbie, I also encourage you to kind of come back and to think about like some of those questions, like what is your superpower and what makes you come most alive, right? And then just sort of knock doors, shake hands, and just try and get yourself directly like, hey, I love this. I love playing this role with seniors. Here's where I'm in my superpower, and here's how I can help you. Right. And I think it's like we've all earned it, but we've certainly earned it when we're still doing the work in our 60s. So I think those questions are just as relevant to you, right? And maybe in some ways more for you really to refine like what is it that I want to contribute kind of moving forward, and how specific and precise do I want to be with that? Does that make sense, Debbie?
Yeah. Unfortunately, health reasons are going to limit me. So, but yes, I wish I knew this earlier. And
Well,
one more question.
yeah.
Um, the networking and things like that. I love telling people I'm with LifeBridge, and then doing the 3-minute little elevator speech because a lot of people don't know what AmeriCorps is, etc.
Mhm.
We're though kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. We are not allowed to be branded outside of our hours. So if I'm going networking, and this is my understanding from all this time is, always be branded. And yes, that kind of thing. But when I leave out of here, and let's say I do want to talk about it with somebody, but it's not in my hours and stuff, my understanding is I'm not to be branded. I'm not to have my shirt on or my name tag, etc. So sometimes those conversations don't happen. But when I do walk around with it, people ask me. So that's where I feel like we're caught. We're not supposed to wear our stuff.
Yeah, well, and we'll go ahead and answer this. And I want to make sure we leave some room for others who might have
Yeah.
questions before we wrap up. I saw Dana lean in, and so I think Dana might have something to add to this. But I would guess, just from my experience with AmeriCorps, is that we don't necessarily want people out there wearing their AmeriCorps gear, representing their organizations on their free time, right? There should be a separation of that.
Right.
But I can't imagine that there would be anything saying you're not allowed to say I'm with this organization and this is what I'm doing, right? Like, so I think that it's like we don't want you writing for the brand and taking on other potentially prohibited activities while you're identifying
Right.
yourself as an AmeriCorps member in your service organization. But of course, when you're networking, that's your experience to own. So I would offer that. I see Dana kind of nodding, and I'm thinking, Dana, is there anything you would add to that?
No, that's a great point. And I can't speak for your program, but if you want to wear your AmeriCorps shirt to your Rotary and speak about your service or to any group of people, I mean, that's how I love to network when I was an AmeriCorps member. People want to hear your story. You're really inspiring. So I went to Rotary clubs, I did presentations, any civic group. You could wear your logo there, and that's how people are going to remember you, if that kind of answers your question.
Awesome. So I see a question in the chat that I want to pick up real quick. And really, this is just a question about any thoughts or advice on getting in with sort of our federal agencies that are doing land management and conservation work, especially when we're looking at the political climate, right? So talking about sort of staff layoffs and people being severed from their jobs. So what I will offer, I will say high level this. There are a lot of people in a lot of communities who are having these conversations candidly on Instagram, on Reddit. Like there are people who are talking about these things. So I would say go and find those folks just so you can stay abreast. Number two, a lot of these things are just simply going to have to go through the courts, right? And so there's a period of this where we just have to be patient to see how some of these executive orders and staff eliminations shake out, right? So kind of like there's a little bit of a wait and see here. Beyond that, what I do know is the Park Service, for example, I can speak to Yellowstone, which is here in my backyard. They have been given the go ahead to hire a bunch of seasonal workers, right? So I think seasonal opportunities seem to remain, and most people who are wanting to get on permanently are going to start as a seasonal worker. So look for those seasonal ones, track what's happening in the courts, track where those conversations are happening. Another one is where we're going to see a lot of this work being picked up is going to be by different foundations. So wilderness foundations, forest foundations, citizens groups, things like that. So keep your eye peeled on where that work's moving, right? So this work is going to go to other organizations. A lot of that's going to be held by the nonprofit sector. So again, if we're keeping up with the conversations, we're going to get some leads onto where those things are happening. So great question and complicated one, but don't lose hope. That's what I would offer. So okay, we are right on time here. And so I want to honor your willingness to stay with us for this entire time. It's been a pleasure. I really hope that you've gained value from our time together today. If you have questions, you're willing to reach out to me. It's Shannon at Train Jumpstart is the email address. You can find me on Instagram. It's just Shannon Stober, and Dana can point you in that direction. So with that, best of luck on your journey, Cosmic Highway and Scenic Byway. I hope to run into you again sometime soon. And thank you so much for your service, everybody.
Thanks, Shannon. That was
Beautiful.
awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.